On Monday morning, Aaron Alexis opened fire at a D.C. Navy yard, killing 12 people and injuring countless others. The big question, why? Once again, the quandary, is it guns, mental illness? Some wonder if his 18-hour-a-day habit of playing violent video games contributed. Joining me now, Harvard University professor of psychiatry, Dr. John Sharp, and the author of War Play, Video Games and the Future of Armed Conflict, Corey Mead. All right, Dr. Sharp, I'm going to start with you. You do believe that there's a connection between the games and violent behavior. Why?
Well, you can look at the journals and see that it's clear. There are new meta-analyses, studies that take into account all the little studies that have been done over the years. There was one about 10 years ago showed that there's maybe a question of a correlation, but the one that was done in 2010 shows that it's definitive. People with exposure to violent video games are way more likely to have changes in their aggression, in their thinking, their feelings, their behavior, desensitization. It's all there. And also it makes intuitive sense, doesn't it?
Well, to me it does, but I don't pretend to be an expert here. Corey, do you agree with that?
Well, I will say this: the military doesn't agree with that. That's not what they're interested in with the video games. What they see,
does the military say?
The military likes the fact that when you play these contemporary video games, which are really advanced and complex, the cognitive thinking skills and the ability to filter your way through massive amounts of incoming chaotic data are the same skills that a soldier needs on the battlefield today.
But doesn't that go right to what Dr. Sharp is saying? Specifically,
sure, we're agreeing.
that if the military thinks it's a good thing because it helps them out, then that means it's like training. It's like 101 to kill people.
But they don't like him because they help them to learn to be violent. They like him. It's simply the fact of how you have to deal with these incoming channels of data that are kind of overwhelming.
What
if you can figure
by
out an effective
when
you're playing a game, for example, you're dealing with text, you're dealing with visuals, you're dealing with sound, you're dealing with whatever else, and it's coming at you rapid fire. The same way if you're on the battlefield, you're getting communications into your helmet.
But it's
so
just
if you
like
can figure
cops.
out,
Well,
right?
The problem is, though, that...
Go ahead, doctor.
If I could say, well, people in the military presumably are selected and they're trained and they're ready for this kind of exposure. Astronauts in simulators, same thing. But these are vulnerable, isolated people, maybe disturbed thoughts, maybe people on the brink or in full-fledged mental illness. You put them in a simulator and they're in this kind of wishful projection around this first-degree shooter. They believe that they're that guy, and it makes it a lot easier to go out and be that guy. That is a big problem.
Right, Corey?
That's not the focus of my book, War Play. I would say that what the military likes about them is not the fact that you learn how to shoot, it's the fact that you learn how to think in a complex situation.
But
so whether or not it's Grand Theft Auto or a game about making peace and waving hands and, everybody loving each other, you're still dealing with the same thinking process.
Yeah, but making peace and waving hands is a little slower than killing people. And I can't help but think about police, what they go through in terms of training.
Yeah.
The
police use video games too. The police use video games too.
Exactly. It trains them. You call it incoming information. I call it trains them to kill as many people as possible and to be aware of their surroundings.
Well, I think you're
Judge,
looking at the content and not what the games are doing.
All right, doctor, go ahead.
Well, just in terms of the content, you can also train people in terms of pro-social behavior. So there's also good data to show that if you're playing a video game, say, where you're trying to save little fluffy things from getting killed, and then you leave the actual gaming itself, you're more likely to help someone. In one experiment, an examiner spilled pens and studied who, after this exposure, was more likely to help them pick the pens up. It actually encouraged pro-social behavior. So we're very likely to be conditioned by these experiences. Absolutely, it's clear.
Corey?
Well, I would say that for the military, they use a number of games that have nothing to do with the battlefield. They have to do with things like cultural interaction and language cues, and they're also being used to treat their PTSD when they come back.
All right, think about this. $800 million for that latest video game. What is Grand Theft
Auto 5?
Auto 5, whatever. There are $800 million, a lot of kids, middle schoolers, high schoolers.
$800 million.
One day,
yeah.
That's right. So then the question is, why aren't they all killing? How do we identify the ones who, like this Aaron Alexis, 18 hours a day and then goes out and shoots people?
Well, there's another question, too, which is that in the other large game markets around the world, Japan being the other biggest one, violent crime is extremely low.
Doctor, how do you answer that? Dr. Sharp, violent crime extremely low in Japan.
There are cultural factors. There are factors in terms of gun availability. And in terms of American mentality, I think the big thing is whether someone's vulnerable to mental illness. You know, in the 21 mass shootings over the past recent years, 9 of the patients or the people there were patients who had untreated mental illness. So it's not a question of being mentally ill. It's a question of being untreated. And people who are, you know, unhinged, who aren't getting the right treatment, are the type that are going to be the most likely to be sorely affected by this.
All right, Dr. Sharp and Corey Mead, thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
$27 billion business that ain't going away.